So you've gotten bitten by the DIY bug and you decide that you want to start using your garage as your workspace, or you already have an existing workspace and you want to know ways in order to make it safer. Well, here are 5 simple safety tips that I follow in my own garage, and hopefully you can incorporate them as well. Also, if you stick around to the end, there's going to be one bonus tip that I think you'll enjoy. So let's go ahead and get started. Huh? What'd you say? What? I can't hear you. What? I can't hear you. Now the first one is pretty obvious, and that is PPE, which stands for Personal Protective Equipment. And that can include, but is not limited to, things such as safety glasses, respirators, or earmuffs. Now, what's really important is that you use your PPE always. Now, it's no secret that when you're doing DIY projects, you're going to be dealing with all sorts of things such as sawdust. You're going to have things constantly flying at you, or you're going to be making a lot of noise, especially with a lot of power tools. So it's important that you protect yourself, and that's why PPE is so important. Listen, don't let anyone tell you it's not cool. Making sure that you're safe is the #1 element in the shop, and PPE is the first step to doing that. Now, one of the things that seem to be controversial when I'm working on something is when I'm using gloves to just move things around the shop. The number of comments I have that say, "Why are you wearing gloves?" is astounding. I personally don't want to get a simple cut on my hands if I can avoid it. So gloves is the first thing to preventing that. Now, when you're cutting and using circular tools like a circular saw or a table saw, you definitely don't want to be wearing gloves, as those can get caught by the blade, and it's just one more thing that you don't want to have to worry about. But definitely it's good for when you're moving things around to help you prevent from getting cut. And I also value my hearing, so making sure that the vacuum cleaner that I'm running or the power tool that I'm also running at the same time is not causing any hearing damage, because I want to ensure that I can do this hobby for years to come. Now, there's also a myth floating around that if you are working outside, you don't need to use any of the PPE because you have the outside elements. I want to say that's absolutely not true. You definitely still want to use caution. You still want to wear a respirator if you're going to be cutting a lot during that day. You always want to make sure you wear safety glasses, and you always want to make sure that you're protecting your hearing inside or outside. Now, the second principle that I try to live by is one called Lockout Tagout. And basically what that is for me in my garage, when I am changing the bit or the blade on a reciprocating tool, I always make sure that it is not only turned off, but it's also plugged out. Or if it's running on a battery, I make sure I take the battery out. Let me give you an example. If I'm going to be changing the blade on my circular saw, which runs off a 18-volt battery, I always take out the battery. And the reason why is because I don't want to accidentally turn it on and be in a potential dangerous situation. I do the same thing with my router, which is a plugged-in tool. I plug it out of the wall whenever I want to change the bit. This just gives me peace of mind, as I don't have to worry about anything going wrong in that scenario as far as the tool accidentally turning on. Now, most power tools are going to have some variation of a safety button where it requires a second button in order to turn the tool on, but some tools also don't have that. So rather than worry about which of my tools do and which of my tools don't, I just prefer to plug everything out. But let me know what you do when you're changing the blade or bit on one of your tools. Do you plug out the tool or do you leave it plugged in? Now, it's no secret that in 2024, phones have become a part of our daily lives. We use them for everything from ordering food to making phone calls to shooting YouTube videos. I'm actually using a phone right now. I understand the importance of it. But when I'm using power tools, especially a table saw, I always want to make sure that I have as few distractions as possible. So one of the first things I do when I enter the garage is I take it out of my pocket and I put it in a pencil case that I picked up at Walmart for 99 cents. Now, one of the great things about being able to put my phone in a central location is the fact that, first of all, it's no longer a distraction for me. It allows me to disconnect from the outside world, things like bills, text messages, social media. I don't have to worry about any of that. It's just whatever I want to work on for that day, and that's one of the things I love about being in here. All right, so what number are we on? 4. I think we're on number 4. Okay, so the fourth way I try to stay safe is by making sure I take my breaks. You'd be surprised. This is kind of like a union garage. I make sure that every 1.5 hours, I take a 20-minute break. Yes, let me repeat that. Every 90 minutes is followed by a 20-minute break. And here are the reasons why. It's because when you're going to be working in a garage, especially if you're woodworking or you're building something else, you are going to be on your feet. You're going to be moving around, you're going to be standing up, you're going to be bending down. So it's really important that you give your body a rest. Also, I'd like to go a step further and say that your mind is also taking a toll. When you are building something, you are thinking about what you're doing in the moment. You're thinking about the next steps. You're thinking about what you're going to make for dinner. You're thinking about the things that you're ignoring now so that you can build. That constantly keeps your mind going. So you want to make sure that you take that rest as well so that you could stay sharp. This is especially important when you're doing repetitive tasks, like when you're cutting the same length of material for an hour or for 2 hours. You want to make sure that you don't fall into a state of complacency. So taking that break every 90 minutes helps. It allows you to sit down, it reminds you to get water, stay hydrated, especially if it's really, really hot in your workspace. So that's why I'm such an advocate of it. So every 90 minutes, I take that 20-minute break, and every 3 hours, I try to take an even longer lunch just to make sure that I stay fresh. Now I'm thinking about when I first started this channel, I was a lot younger than I am now, and I would be in here all day long. As I've gotten older, that is just not the case. I want to ensure that I can do this for years to come. So I always make sure that I get my breaks in, or if I'm not feeling it that day, I don't even waste time. I don't even come in here because it's just not worth it. But please take your breaks and make sure you drink water. That's super important. I don't drink enough, and it's something I definitely want to do better in the future. Actually, I think I'll take a water break right now before we get to the last tip. All right, now that I've had some water, we can get through our last tip. And don't forget, we still have the bonus tip. Okay, the 5th way that I try to stay safe is by making sure that I always have visibility of a first aid kit and a fire extinguisher. Now, when you are on your DIY grind and you're working with lumber or metal or some hard plastics, you're probably going to cut yourself. And that is not going to be an issue if you have a first aid kit handy. You want to make sure you know where it is so that you can go ahead and patch yourself up for if you start to get a splinter or any other thing that happens. Now, even if you're trying to be as safe as possible, anything can happen at any time, whether you're inside or you're outside or you're in the garage or in the living room. Having a fire extinguisher is always a plus because it can help you put out a small fire quickly. So knowing where it is and making sure that it's functional is very important. So that's why I advocate for making sure that you have a fire extinguisher and a first aid kit. Those two things should go hand in hand. All right, here's the bonus tip that I promised you, and it may be a little controversial, but here it is. Clamps. Make sure you invest in a set of clamps, and I'm going to tell you why. The whole purpose of a clamp is to restrict freedom of movement. It's to make sure that whatever it is that you're cutting or holding or gluing stays in place. Now, when I think back to a couple close calls that I've had or seen, it's usually when you're cutting a piece and it starts to move on you because you're holding it by hand. What's great about clamps is it's going to remove that element and it's going to keep the piece stationary while you cut. And then what it also does, which is another added benefit, is it may allow you to cut the piece without having your hands close to the blade as it would if you were trying to hold it. So that's why I'm such an advocate for clamps. All right, guys, so there you have it. Those are my 5 ways to stay safe. Let me know if you agree or disagree with some of those tips, or if you feel like there may be something that I was missing, let me know down in the comments. As always, I'm Neil, and I'll see you guys the next time I decide to hit the upload button. Peace.